Hello everyone, my name is Professor Vidya-mitra. The name of the module is Food and Agricultural Organization FAO. Introduction. The Food and Agricultural Organization FAO is a United Nations specialized agency established for the purposes of eliminating hunger, improving nutrition, increasing living standards. So, what do you must learn from this module? To understand the working and structure of the FAO, to have a deeper understanding of its objectives, to have a working knowledge of the various food projects which the FAO has undertaken across the world. Now, what are the objectives of the FAO? To understand the objectives, let us look into the Constitution. The preamble aims at number 1, raising levels of nutrition and standards of living, securing improvements in the efficiency and production and distribution of all food and agricultural products, bettering the condition of rural populations, and thus contributing towards an expanding world economy and ensuring humanity's freedom from hunger. For this is most important. Now, there are certain strategic objectives which have to be keep in mind. In keeping with this mandate, the FAO has developed 5 strategic objectives that generally guides its institutional activities for the current period. Number 1, help eliminate hunger, food insecurity and malnutrition. 2, make agriculture, forestry and fisheries more productive and sustainable. 3, reduce rural poverty. 4, enable inclusive and efficient agricultural and food systems. And 5, increase the resilience of livelihoods to threats and crises. The FAO acts as a coordinator and forum where states and technical agencies can come together to share their policy expertise and develop initiatives designed to accomplish these goals. It employs experts including agronomists, fisheries and livestock specialists, nutritionists, foresters, social scientists, economists and statisticians to produce and disseminate information regarding standards which are best practices for sustainable farming and scientific techniques on food and nutritional issues. Apart from this policy making, it works with NGOs and food industry partners on initiatives to improve rural access to food and food markets. It works with the World Food Programme or the WFP and other humanitarian agencies provide support in times of crisis. And it provides monitoring and risk assessment services to alert countries to potential problems regarding agriculture and nutrition. Having said that, it would not be wrong to say that FAO is also a source of knowledge and information and helps developing countries in transition to modernize and improve agriculture, forestries and fisheries practices, ensuring good nutrition and food security for all. Its Latin motto, Fiat Panis, translate as let there be bread. As of August 8, 2013, FAO has 194 member states along with the European Union, a member organization, and the Faro Islands, the Tokelau, which is associate members. Now, let us go back to the history of the FAO. The idea of an international organization for food and agriculture emerged in the late 19th, early 20th century, advanced primarily by the US agriculturalist and activist David Lubin. In May-June 1905, an international conference was held in Rome, Italy, which led to the creation of the International Institute of Agriculture. Later in 1943, the then United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt called a United Nations Conference on Food Agriculture. Representatives from 44 governments gathered at the Homestead Resort in Hot Springs, Virginia from 18th May to 3rd June. They committed themselves to founding a permanent organization for food and agriculture, which happened in Quebec City, Canada on 16th October 1945. With the conclusion of the Constitution of the Food and Agricultural Organization. So, this, as you see, was its inception. The first session of the FAO conference was held in the Chateau Frontenac at Quebec, Canada from 16th October to 1st November 1945. The Second World War effectively ended the International Agriculture Institute, though it was only officially dissolved by resolution of its permanent committee on 27th of February 1948. Its functions were then transferred to the recently established FAO. Now, let us look at the institution. The FAO is headquartered in Roma or Rome, Italy. It also maintains regional as well as sub-regional offices throughout the world and has representation in more than 120 countries. The FAO is relatively decentralized, particularly since a major restructuring that took place in 1994, with much of the personnel working in these field offices. The FAO is governed by the Conference of Member Nations, which is made up of all 194 member states. The European Union, a member organization, associate members, the Faroe Islands and Tokyo. The conference meets every 2 years to review the organization's work, determine policy goals and approve the FAO budget. It is further assisted by a Committee on World Food Security, which works to coordinate and development food security policies. The conference elects a group of 49 member countries to what is known as the Council. These members serve the 3-year rotating terms and act in the Council as the FAO's executive organ. The conference also appoints the FAO's DG for a once renewable 4-year term. The current Director General is Jose Grazione da Silva, a long-time advocate on issues of food security, rural development and agriculture, who has held that position since 2012. The organization is divided into 7 departments. Let us see what are these departments. One is the Department of Administration and Finance, then there is Agriculture and Consumer Protection, there is Economic and Social Development, Fisheries and Aquaculture, Forestry, Natural Resource Management and Environment and Technical Cooperation. Now, what about the budget? How does it get this money to fund so many things? The FAO's budget is funded by regular contributions from the member states, as well as additional voluntary contributions from member states and other partners, which also brings the question that whether it plays a role as a forum for human rights. It is to be remembered, the right to adequate food and freedom from hunger is one of the most basic human rights and is contained in a number of international and regional human rights treaties. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights states in Article 25 that, and I quote, Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing and medical care and necessary social services. The right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age or other lack of livelihood in circumstances which is far and beyond his control. Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the ICESCR, more expansively attests that the state parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing and housing, and or to the continuous improvement of living conditions. The state parties will take appropriate steps to ensure the realization to this effect of this right, recognizing the essential importance of international cooperation based on the doctrine of free consent. The state parties to the present covenant recognizing the fundamental right of everyone to be free from hunger shall take individually and through international cooperation the measures which include specific programs which are needed to improve methods of production, conservation and distribution of food and food grains by making full use of technical and scientific knowledge, by disseminating knowledge of the principles of nutrition and by developing or reforming agrarian systems in such a way as to achieve the most efficient development and utilization of natural resources. Taking into account the problems of both food importing and food exporting, countries to ensure an equitable distribution of world food supplies in relation to need. Additional protections are included in many international and regional instruments, including, for example, the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, that is CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, the additional protocol to the American Convention on Human Rights. In the area of economic, social and cultural rights, the Protocol of San Salvador, the African Charter on the Rights and the Welfare of the Child, and the Protocol to the African Charter on Human Rights on Humans and People. Then there are rights on the rights of women in Africa, to name a few. Approaching food security through the lens of the right to food is important because it frames the need for accessible, available and adequate food as a legal entitlement rather than as an aid or charity. It emphasizes the obligation of states rather than the goodwill of countries or private donors to ensure that individuals as well as communities can either produce or access on the market sufficient food of sufficient quality to meet their needs. Furthermore, the right to food envisions food security as inseparable from other human rights principles, such as non-discrimination, equality and accountability, and thus a more holistic view of viewing priorities and programs. As Special Rapporteur on the right to food, Olivier de Schutter explains, the right to adequate food is not a slogan. It imposes obligations on states and non-state actors alike which are grounded in international law, putting it at the center of our response to the global food crisis, which leads us to the fundamentally rethink the nature of the challenge we are facing and what it requires to make progress towards addressing it. Because of its status as a United Nations specialized agency and its focus on eliminating hunger, improving nutrition and reducing poverty, the FAO is a natural forum for human rights work. With respect to the right to food, all UN entities must abide by the UN Charter, which establishes human rights as a major institutional goal. We, the peoples of the United Nations, are determined to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and the worth of human person, in equal rights of men and women and of nations, large and small. In this context, the FAO's work as a knowledge base for food and agriculture, its crisis and emergency support efforts, its work to combat malnutrition, its programs promoting food security and safety, and other activities contribute directly to the fulfillment of every person's right to adequate food. The FAO is committed to framing its work via a human rights based approach with a particular focus on equity. It has worked to mainstream human rights into its policy, documents and programs. It has made significant efforts to focus on the rural poor, and it has been identified on the basis of gender and governance as two cross-cutting themes that are to be integrated into all area of its work. This human rights framework has allowed the FAO to develop a sophisticated approach to food and agricultural security that goes beyond simply assessing the quantity of food produced, asking in addition who produces it, how it is produced, and what nutrition quality it holds. The FAO, apart from these, has also contributed to the development of the right to food as an international legal and political concept. More generally, in 1996, the FAO sponsored the World Food Summit, an international convention on food and agriculture. The World Food Summit Plan of Action, which issued from that conference, established as its objective 7.4 to clarify the content of the right to adequate food and the fundamental right of everyone to be free from hunger, as stated in the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights and other relevant international and regional instruments, and to give particular attention to implementation and full and progressive realization of these rights as a means of achieving food security for all. The plan of action further invited the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and other human rights institutions to better define the rights relating to food in Article 11 of the ICESCR, and to propose ways to implement and realize these rights. It was as a result of the invitation that the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights adopted by the General Comment, that is 12 in 1999, elaborating its authoritative view on the progressive realization of this right. Following up on the World Food Summit and the General Comment 12 in 2004, the FAO member states adopted the landmark voluntary guidelines to support progressive realization of the rights to food in the context of national food security. These voluntary guidelines provide guidance and practical information regarding implementation of the right to food in the context of national food security. The voluntary guidelines are, moreover, the first document on how to operationalize an economic, social and cultural right that has been adopted by member states outside the human rights system. The voluntary guidelines take a human rights based approach focusing inter alia on democracy and the rule of law, strengthening national human rights systems, education, nutrition, food aid, social safety nets and international assistance. Though they are voluntary and thus do not have binding weight as international law, they are helpful as an articulation of concrete steps that countries can take to implement the right to food. In 2006, the FAO created a right to food unit to support members in implementing the right to food guidelines. The right to food unit provides information, developed toolkits and best practices guidelines, assists in manufacturing and mainstreaming the right to food in the FAO's work, provide technical expertise, policy advice and assists with capacity development. Through this and other mechanisms, the FAO continues to provide extensive support to national governments seeking to implement the guidelines, as well as undertaking specific right to food projects at the country level. Now, what are the current food projects? The coherent food security responses includes the incorporating right to food into global and regional food insecurity initiatives, projects which aims improving a global governance as well as regional food security governance, the development of a hunger free initiative for West Africa in association with ECOWAS, the improved global governance for hunger program which seeks to improve the way that the international community responds to hunger by, for example, mainstreaming the right to food approach in social protection programs, the integrating the right to adequate food and good government in national policies, legislations and institutions project, which works with government and non-governmental stakeholders in Mozambique, Bolivia, Nepal and El Salvador to strengthen institutions and promote good governance. The mainstreaming the right to food and nutrition into the smallholder commercialization program which supports the government of Sierra Leone, especially which is conflict afflicted, in adding a nutrition right to food component in its smallholder commercialized program and district development plans, thus mainstreaming the right to food into sub-national plans and strategies. These programs, which supports governments and civil society in Uganda, Sierra Leone and Tanzania in their efforts to promote good governance at the local level, the support to country level, learning from actions for food security in Southern Africa project, which, for example, focuses on learning from experiences to increase the effectiveness of food security programs. Despite its generally strong record on human rights issues, like any other UN body, it is not a stranger to questions and criticism. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, Olivier de Schutter, for example, has pointed out that the FAO has not done enough to mainstream the right to food across all sectors of the organization's activities. As a part of the review of the FAO's human rights policy conducted in 2013, de Schutter argued that despite its good work thus far, the FAO continued to face challenges in overcoming the silo effect, whereby the right to food is primarily promoted through discrete projects carried out by only one part of the organization. To this end, the Special Rapporteur recommended focusing on high impact activities in support of the right to food. With that, mainstreaming the right to food by making it the operative criteria in project clearance and monitoring processes, systematically integrating right to food procedural requirements into FAO regional and country activities. Also, ensuring the alignment to FAO norms and standards with the right to food. Expanding right to food support to national as well as regional governments. Ensuring that country guidance is compatible with the right to food framework, providing practical guidance on the right to food in partnership with civil society, and recognizing NGOs and other civil society organizations as partners. Now, this is again a very important aspect. Other commentators have also expressed desire for more and a bit firm action on the right to food. John Tetton, Director of the International Food Security Treaty Campaign, has argued that FAO's approach is insufficiently steeped in hard law, and that the organization should support a treaty based regime that would impose firmer legal obligations. So, he insists on a treaty based regime, basically to alleviate hunger and urban as well as rural poverty and to give human right. So, in order to summarize the entire proceeding, the FAO as an organization, despite its setbacks, has been able to overcome some problems prevalent to hunger, food insecurity, malnutrition, and ensuring that the basic rights and dignity of the individual are not marginalized. Secondly, it is approaching a treaty based programs among nations. It has been able to put forth participation of members both at the national and interregional and the sub-regional level, and secondly, to allow private and governmental partnership in allowing more food to reach places which are conflict ridden, and is slowly trying to move away from the silo effect. Thank you.